It was in Grandma's living room, and it stood on a certain table all the years that I knew about it. Never was opened.
Now that's Grandma Thompson, right?
Yes,
So
never was opened. So
that's
I
your
didn't know
grandma.
anything about it. But I took it when she died.
Now, who wrote all of this?
And when she,
Well, it's one of the girls' writing. It isn't Grandma's signature. So it must have been my mother or somebody's.
This is all your writing, Grandma.
You think it's mine?
Definitely.
Well, I
So
know.
at one time or another, you filled it in.
yeah, this is
Maybe I filled it in after she died. But when I
Okay, we'll start with Grandma Thompson. Her parents were who?
well, if you want to know back to the Bruners, she was. I have a picture of her. Well, her father, Franklin Bruner, and I have a picture of her, of Elizabeth. That was her great-grandmother, or her mother. And she was the first white child born in Rutland Township.
Now, Grandma, are you talking about your grandmother? This is her parents?
No,
Or we're back-
that would be my great-grandmother. Her name was Elizabeth.
This is your great-grandmother, Ida Thompson.
Now, let's see, I have got, somewhere I've got
Grandma
the-
Thompson was her great, Ida was her
My
grandmother.
grandmother.
My great-grandmother. Then this is her mother.
Okay.
So that'd be
But
her
I wanted
great-grandmother.
to tell you how I just was telling Keith something that's very interesting, I think, because none of us would be here today if it wasn't for this Indian chief. He was a Potawatomi. He was born in Canada, and then he came down the river, and he was at Shabana Park. You know where Shabana Park is. And that's his picture. And he was a very friendly Indian man. Here's another picture of him. If some of you'd like to see that. And there's a monument of him over in Shabana Park.
Tell us what he did.
Well, he traveled and he went around to the residence, and he called on my families. He called on the Bruners. That would be her parents. Her parents. He went there very often, and she gave him food. And so they lived now, do you know, on 71, where the Broomback Cemetery is?
I do.
Okay, it's just before you cross, just after you cross the creek. And the Bruners, the Broombacks lived back there. And so when there was an uprising, and that's told in these articles about the uprising of the Indians, and there were many killed. But Shabana sent a warning to my family of Broombacks, and they took she was pregnant, and they took her.
Are they ready?
Yeah.
That's why it's good that's on tape.
And they took their cattle and all their supplies, and they went to Ottawa, and they stopped at a farm there, and they didn't go on over to Ottawa to the fort. The farmer asked them to stay there, and they stayed, and she had her baby there. It was a baby boy. So they stayed with that farmer for a year And then they came back. And later then, she had this one that I showed you the picture of. And so that's made her the first white child born in Rutland Township. And
that child was?
that was Elizabeth Bruner. That is Broomback, and she married a Bruner later. And my grandmother then was her daughter. She was born in 1856. So you know these things are pretty old because they all belong to Grandma. And that's her picture, and that's my grandmother. But she was a very, very nice, very good woman. And she then well, my grandmother got in trouble. And she had a baby girl. And so Elizabeth asked John Thompson to marry her. He lived neighbor, and they went to school together. And so he married her, and then they had 2 children, 2 girls after that. Lily Thompson, and Hazel. Hazel married Diebold, and Lily married Broomback, or Lily Fur married Donnelly, and so that makes Donnelly. You've met Donnelly.
Right, yep.
You have too, met Donnelly.
So,
But my mother was a little girl when she died. They all lived together there. And now where did I put that?
so Grandma,
And I have the original of what she was sitting in the living room as her grandmother was dying. And she wrote, "Dear, dear grandmother, Bruner was the first white child born in the township of Rutland and died on Saturday night at 10 o'clock with heart trouble at the age of 66 years and 8 months. She died October 10th, 1896. She was a very, 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 very good grandma. I always think of that.
Now, who was the first white baby born?
Elizabeth Broomback. My great grandmother. But just think, 4 Garys.
and that's
Now,
your what?
She's a little girl. She's a little girl writing this.
But this is your what?
My mother was a little girl sitting there.
Your mother is writing this about her grandmother.
Yes, 4 Garys. She had lived with her all her life. And she had relations and friends far and near. Her loss was very great, and she was loved by all who knew her. She passed away very, very easy by going to sleep, every breath growing shorter until she died. And this is her original. I put it under wax. I had to use it, but this is what she wrote.
Grandma?
But Shabana,
Question, please.
Question.
Sherry's got a question.
When you said, I'm getting confused on the generations,
yeah,
it was your great-grandmother?
that was the first white child.
Okay, and then her daughter was the one, you said they got Ida, they got Mr. Thompson to marry her?
Yes. John
But she
Thompson.
was already with child?
Yes,
had
she
one?
had a little girl.
Do they
Already?
know-
My mother. My mother.
Okay. Do they know who the father was?
Never
or-
knew.
No? They don't know what happened?
No guesses? No,
If they knew, they never,
no guesses even, huh?
I don't know.
Oh,
You don't even know if it was
I didn't-
tragic or...
I didn't know anything about that until Orbell was going with Jim.
Oh, really?
And they were that would have made them. My grandfather and Jim's grandfather were brother and sister. So they'd have been second cousins or third or something like that.
Fourth, fifth.
So
Great
how did you-
grandmother.
So then Nettie,
Great-grandmother.
Jim's mother came to me and
My
told
great
me about
grandmother
that.
and Jim's
Now, she
great
knew-
grandmother
She knew this story
were
then?
brothers.
So that Nettie knew
child.
before you did?
Jim's,
Did Nettie know it before you did?
sure,
She did.
Nettie had known it all her life.
But no one knew the real story then? No one knew the facts of what happened?
And if she knew it, knew who, she never told, or never, Nettie didn't know who it was, and there nobody, if Grandma ever knew it, she'd tell it.
Grandma, then why, okay, that one time when I had asked, where does the, when you
Not
said the
really.
French came
And
in,
he's always known.
you said there was a little bit of French. When I asked you just about Bristol and Stangeland and stuff like that, when I had asked you why, where did you think the French came in?
Let's see, how did I know that?
I was-
Amy, I can't remember that.
Because then that's why I kind of thought that you maybe knew who it was, because you said there was,
Never knew. My grandpa's father was born in Norway, and he came here and
Bill
married.
Barlin knew of the
And
situation.
he married Sarah
Uttered from either one of the mother's
Sarah
mouths.
from Woodrum, or that is up in that
We didn't
area.
give the farm away for it.
Seeing a movie? I didn't.
They must never wanted.
Why have, let me stop you. Let me stop you.
No, but that, yeah,
And what age was she then? We figured that out.
that was a lady at Pleasant View.
It was, or
That's a story too. Grandpa and I did volunteer work at Pleasant View.
compared to what we
And,
thought.
Yeah.
Grandpa used to
Old enough to say no.
take this lady down to our meetings. We showed him pictures and celebrated birthdays. And he used to take her down there and then he'd take her back to the cabin. So,
he's buried in Morris?
back to her room. So she wouldn't go with anyone else but him. So we took their picture. She wouldn't go back to her room until he took her back. So that's how that was. Well, I don't know if there's anything else I can tell you, only that if Shabana hadn't sent people to, there were many butchered. Those Indians just butchered them. It tells here how they mistreated them and took and killed them.
Now, why did they not go to the fort? Why did they go to the farm?
Some of them weren't warned. They didn't get the warning that ours did.
Oh,
They
okay.
lived back in the
Right, yep.
timbers and so we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Chief Shabana.
Okay,
So
now,
I've always had respect for him because of that.
now your mother,
Or
was she born down under the hill, up the valley from where we lived? You said those,
Yeah.
you know, there's those foundations, and was that where your mother was born? Or was it before that?
Before that, I think.
So your great-grandmother was probably down underneath the hill there.
I think so.
and Ida Thompson was Laura
I
Bell's.
never knew. Val Varlin maybe could tell more about it than I can, but there's,
Graham Thompson was my great grandmother.
Now, Grandma,
yeah.
what was the story on your house?
On who?
On your house? Didn't you say it was built for somebody else?
Oh, well, yes.
Oh, you
see Lily,
to look at.
Grandma's daughter, middle daughter, was married to Robert Furr. And he lost his job. He lived in Newark for a while and worked for cars, fixing cars. And then he and Lily moved home. He didn't have a job. And so they decided, Grandma and Grandpa decided they'd build her house. So they owned that land down by the river. So they hired carpenters, and they had to feed them. And so they were cooking on the cook stove, and it was hot. So they asked me to be the babysitter. So I wheeled him up and down. He was about a year and a half, 2 years old, and I wheeled him up and down the walk. I was about 12 years old. And they cooked for the carpenters and served them. And so I babysat him while they built that house down there. I didn't know it was to be mine someday. Well, then we were married in 1927. And Grandma came to me and said, now, you can live in that house, because they had rented it to some cousins. He liked the barn because he drove for the silica. He worked at the silica, and he had the barn for his horses. So she asked them to leave, which they weren't happy about, and we moved in 1927. So that's how I was babysitting for them to build my house.
Now, when did you start teaching them?
Well, I took the teacher's exam as soon as I graduated from high school, from Ottawa High School, and I graduated there in 23. And so then I took the teacher's exam, but I didn't pass all the subjects, but
What subject?
the school hired me, and I took it again in 6 months and passed it. So I taught that school, Vincent School there on the Morris Blacktop for 2 years. And then I went up to Hall School. That was just there by the
That was on Route 71.
by the Stangeland farm, where you're going
Route
across now.
71, yeah.
Were you the only teacher for all the grades?
One-room schools. One-room schools. I wish I'd have brought the picture. I've got the picture. All the students and their names.
See, Orrin
I had about 20
Orrin
students.
Thompson was one of your students. Orrin Thompson was one of your students.
Formally.
It's his son that's farming the place now, the 80 acres. See, and Orrin farmed it for years and years.
And Jerry's had somebody come to him and say, you were the best teacher he'd ever had.
I had about 20. There was a time that the newspaper went into one-room schools, and they came out and took our pictures. That's how I got several of them. I didn't think about that, or I'd have brought it. And there's something else a little interesting about Ottawa. You know the appellate court, where that is?
Yep.
Well, Ottawa had the choice of having the appellate court or the university, and they chose the appellate court. And if you have never been in it, it's a very, very interesting place. Have you been in it?
Been by.
No elevator, unless they just put.
Probably is now. Probably have to be now.
Is there one now?
I would think so.
There wasn't when I went in a few years ago. No elevator, but they have to go up to the.
What university did they choose?
Would have been Illinois.
No, they chose the appellate
But what,
court.
do they have
Versus
choice?
the University of Illinois?
It's in University of Illinois.
That'd been something to have that in Ottawa.
So,
What a decision.
It was like
There's
Serene
a
and
picture
Sheridan,
of,
Serene High School.
Okay, Mom, now I'm
of
confused
David
on this part.
Grunback,
This,
and
Now, who is
that
that?
was the great-grandfather.
this couldn't have been the first baby.
That's your great-grandfather?
Yeah, that great-great.
Great-great-grandfather.
This is supposed to play formally.
Well, I don't know
All right.
anything else, only,
So this guy lived down underneath the hill,
yes,
farmed underneath the hill.
I don't
I
get where
think so.
Okay.
Ida comes,
But he is not the one that Shabana warned.
Elizabeth
White
was.
child.
Elizabeth
No,
born
well,
by Ida.
it could
Because
be.
that had to be,
Ida and
that had to be
had
in
Elizabeth.
Well,
early
if
1800s.
it was, and then he lived up by the Boone Cemetery.
Where's the,
Time warning.
yeah, where's the Broomback Cemetery?
You know where Belle Garland lives?
Okay, over on 71.
Yeah, on 71.
Yeah, okay.
He says it's on
Oh, they live there?
And that's where, now let's see, I had some pictures.
5 minutes.
Well, that wasn't where they lived when the Indian uprising was.
Yes, that's when
Oh,
they.
it was?
Then when they came back, then they lived down there in the timber.
Oh, okay, so they didn't go back to that place.
I had an envelope with some pictures in it of
You know,
that.
University of Illinois,
cemetery
the appellate
of
court in
the,
Ottawa was a choice. They could have had either the University of Illinois or the appellate court.
What year was that?
You always kind of pretend
It
about
was the appellate court. What year was that appellate court brought to Ottawa?
I think it tells here on it.
Let's see. That's the British mansion.
The first Thanksgiving, I just thought it was kind of interesting.
You should tell us about your transportation when you were teaching.
Oh. Well, we had a little open buggy when it was warm, or when it, yeah. But then in the winter
You're
time,
coming back when?
we had a glassed-in buggy, all glass. And so I had a foot warm, and I had that to keep my feet warm, and that's when I studied for my second exam, to take the teacher's exam after I didn't make it the first time, all of it. And so I drove the horse and buggy, and there was an old barn nearby the schoolhouse on the farm where the house had been taken down. So I tied the horse in the barn and had the fire all. I had a man that,
Hi, Grandma, we gotta get going. I'll see you later on this weekend.
sure.
Good seeing her now. Nice seeing you. Is that still out?
No,
So
but I'll turn it back on. Wait, got it.
Nice seeing you.
Your hospitality.
See you, Bill.
Katie.
See you
be
tonight.
safe.
We'll see you tonight, won't we?
No,
No?
no.
Coming back.
Staying at my mom's.
Gonna miss
I'm
out.
taking off early in the morning.
Gonna miss
for
out on
weekend,
you,
so-
huh?
I don't know, I may have to come and give you guys a whooping, but
But you know, the old farm,
Days in basketball.
there was a hill that came down to that,
I'm just saying.
not too high,
So
high
you see
hill,
me
but
come over.
long hill.
See you guys.
I couldn't restrain the horse at all. I couldn't pull back. The thing that
Reins? The reins?
yeah, across the tongue, or you know,
The bit.
that was broken, and I didn't know that. And of course, when I pulled if he went back, by then she was right back on the. So she just kept going faster and faster, and there I was going down that hill. What was I going to do when I came to the end of it? That was past the house. But Lauren, my brother, saw this coming. And he ran out and grabbed that horse and stopped it. Or I don't know. Me and the buggy would have been turned over.
Well, was the lane there to the D-bolt? You'd gone straight on through into D-bolts, wouldn't you?
Yes,
Yeah.
right down the line, right down to Smith's.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, if the gate was open,
Yeah.
but that was a bad one, I tell you. Yeah. But I drove there and studied in that old, now
What were
Sherry
you gonna
Park.
ask her? She's got all the questions.
Okay,
How old were you when your mom died?
I was 11 years old.
And what did she die of?
She had a bad goiter, a big goiter. And I remember so well, Grandma and Grandpa took her to the doctor. And she came home and my father was building the crib that still stands there on the corner. When you go down that road to the schoolhouse. And he came out to the crib. And as a little girl, I stood there. And he said, "What did the doctor say?"
It's his turn to play the Easter
He said, "I should have surgery and have that taken off." My dad says, "Just as soon as we get this crib done, we'll do it. We'll have it done." But in a few months, the flu, there was a bad flu epidemic. Well, this was the year before, but there was lots of bad flu. She got the flu, got pneumonia, and the goiter burst, and it killed her. So Nana was just a little girl, and Lauren was a little
Did
boy.
Grandpa ever blame himself for that?
Hmm?
Did Grandpa ever blame himself for that, putting it off?
No, I don't think so. It was something that just came about. He got the doctors out, and we had a nurse. She had a nurse around the clock. He did everything he could, but she died.
So how long was it before, when Grace came on the scene then?
Well, for some time, there was an old lady lived in Ottawa that came out. She was a grandma. She came out and stayed with us, and we got along for a while. And then
How long?
A week? 2 days?
she was there for a year or two. And
Didn't you get along
and
at the end?
then he had other help come in. But then he hired Grace Richardson. She was there at her, well, see, they lived first in Indiana. Then they came to Illinois. And I can't remember just where they did live, but anyway, her mother was killed in an auto accident. And so my dad hired her and she worked for a couple of years, and then,
How old was she when she got hired?
boy, I can't tell you just how old, but she
30?
was younger than him. And the sad part of it was that when she got sick, Russie and I went in to see her into the hospital, and she had appendicitis, and they'd operated on her. And when we went down that day, they brought a big tray full of food in it. And I said, "Grace, you mustn't eat that. You just had surgery. You mustn't eat that food." I didn't know much, but I did know that much, that she shouldn't eat that food. She should have liquids. And I went down the hall to a nurse and I said, "That woman has been served food and she just had surgery." "Well, must have been on the chart," she said. And we went home, and sure enough, in a few hours they called, she was dead. That it broke and she died.
How'd you guys get along with Grace?
Good. Grace was very good to us. I have to say I wasn't always appreciative of her, but that was a kid at that age.
Well,
I didn't appreciate him marrying a second wife.
I bet that was hard.
But she had George and Margaret, right?
Yeah. So I wasn't always appreciative of her, but she was
Were you gone when Margaret and George were born, or not?
Yes, when George was, or when Margaret was. But I was home when George was born. She went to the hospital with them, but of course, she was a good housekeeper, and she was a good cook, and she was good to us. And she kept my kids so good.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time there.
Yeah, you remember that.
Yeah, even I did.
Yes, she kept them when we went on vacation or when I was sick or anything. She was very, very good. You remember way better than her.
Yeah.
I'll sit through anything and watch the
What year did she die? Because I can remember her on the porch. They showed her on the porch. Castle.
You remember
I couldn't have been very old.
See all of that on the feed.
Of the house?
See, they
I can remember Grandpa
had the
Thompson.
house.
When Grandpa Thompson died, they laid him out in your parlor. He was laying on a cot, all dressed, in this front spooky room,
Who was Ori?
Grandpa Thompson. And we were all, several of us standing around viewing, and I don't know what I must have been, 5 or 6 years old. And I had a goofy uncle that was always doing something, but pushed me toward that body, and I just about died. And that's all I can remember about that death, but how they laid him out in the parlor like that. And I can remember Grandma Thompson's funeral. She was in a casket, but she laid in the dining room too. And they raped him at home.
Well, when I was born, it was February, of course, and lots of snow. The doctor had to come out on the train. So my dad took the cutter and went over and met the train, and then they picked up the midwife.
At where? Where did she?
At Wedren.
Okay.
And on the way home, they upset in a snowdrift. But they got home, they got there.
Back to the train.
Yeah. They got back and delivered a girl. And in Grandma's diary, I looked and looked for the February diary. And I found it, and she wrote, Ori had a little girl.
Period, huh?
Never said anything about her being sick for 2 or 3 days, and
Because you were the third. Were you the third child?
I was the oldest.
Well, you were the oldest. Okay.
I was the oldest. I was her first delivery. And she never said a word about the snowdrift.
Of Aura, right? The first one of Aura.
Yeah.
Now, didn't you tell me once, Grandma, that you went and stayed at your grandma's house a lot?
Oh,
You had
yes.
that little suitcase? Now, was that when you were real young, or?
And Grandma fixed such good lunches for her. I used to take a friend sometimes, Izell Thompson. She and I'd go and stay all night with Grandma. And she'd fix us the best lunch. And we'd run down the road and then hide in the ditch. Dig down in the ditch and open our little pails to see what Grandma put in for us.
Now, was that
I can see myself in that ditch just as if it was yesterday, looking to see what Grandma put in for us. She had a smokehouse, you know, so she had her,
Dad talks about some kind of a sandwich, some kind of a meat sandwich she made.
yes.
What was
She
it?
used to,
Dad remembered those.
and cookies and, oh, she was such a good grandma. She had more friends. I used to take her when I drove the horse and buggy before I was married. And I'd go over and get her, and she'd have something made for somebody that was sick in the neighborhood, and I'd drive her up there. Oh, how I think, clear down by the river, there was a house, and I'd drive her down there.
Her sisters and brothers and
That I read about, a very, 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 very good grandma. It was her mother, but she was a good mother, grandma too, I tell you. Wasn't she? You remember her a little bit. Merle worked for her. Merle mowed her yard.
Thompson, Grandma Thompson? No, I don't, she was dead.
brothers and sisters.
Yeah,
Mom,
That was Merle.
but
we should put in here your brothers and sisters. Name your brothers and sisters. Your brothers and sisters.
Oldest to youngest.
well, it was Lorne.
Who's the oldest?
Was married to
No, she's,
Elizabeth.
Grandma's the oldest.
Oh, okay.
And Floyd. Floyd died in Florida. Sorry, Floyd was, he liked drink too well. His wife did too. His wife, he quit many times, but stood in the refrigerator and she drank it in front of him. Well, anyway, that's excusing him. And then Myrna, that just died a year ago, was the youngest. She married Brando, Ed Brando, and he just passed away a few months ago.
And then George was your stepbrother.
Then George and Margaret.
No, Mendoza. Mendoza gave him a pretty good rap.
Then-
and said that, you know, they
Who
just
else?
didn't wanna, they just
You
didn't
wanna know
wanna.
her?
How long since Myrna died, Grandma?
Beat, but, you know, the best part of that was,
Isn't it quite a while ago?
In '91, I just,
Yeah, that's 3 years.
Yeah.
Have you got that all written down somewhere, Grandma? Then how about name your mothers, Aura, brothers and sisters. So he's got that on here.
well,
Who are your aunt and uncles?
Aura was the oldest, and then it was Lily that married Robert Furr, that's Donnelly's grandmother,
Okay.
and Hazel Thompson. Hazel died of TB. And I remember Grandma went out in California with them and stayed. Oh, they tried so hard to get her in a good location, and she was doctoring, but she died and they had to bring her home, and I remember Grandma coming in so well. Russie and I went up and stayed with Grandpa some.
Okay, so that's Aura's sister. Okay, what else did she have? She had another sister?
But she had Hazel. Hazel was married to Jason Diebold, and they lived down on the Diebold farm.
And who else was there?
That big house just up above St. Joe.
Yeah. Then who else
She
was
married
there?
Keith.
Who else was there?
That was the three
The
girls.
three.
Okay, that was three.
Okay.
She'd been a daughter now.
Now, are you named after someone, Grandma?
No, I don't know where my mother got that name. There aren't many of us named Ione. There aren't many of us named Ione.
How did Merle, Orabelle, and Dave come about? How did you name David, Orabelle, and Merle?
Well, Orabelle was named after my mother. Her name was Ora Bell. Two names. See it there? But
Nope.
And Marion Orabelle.
But we joined them,
Marion
and Grandma was so pleased. But we really named her after Marion DeVore. She and I were such close friends. And but then Grandma was so pleased that we just called her Orabelle.
Oh, so that's how that,
And then
came about.
How about
would that man do Lucy's pants?
how did Merle come about?
That was a joke,
How was that
right?
named?
She's probably looking up in the baby.
Merle asked that today. Who was he talking to? Merle was talking about that today. Where you ever came up with that name?
Well, I think it was popular back then.
No.
I know
It's in the name
Other
books
Merle.
now.
other
Merle.
Merles back then, they weren't always
It means
boys.
blackbird or something.
I know who he was talking to, Merle
I
Drips.
can't tell you how we came up with that name. He wished we had.
No, he was wondering.
Oh, no, I can't
Well, where did you say
remember.
David came from? He's a biblical character, I suppose. David came after, where'd you get David then?
King David.
A biblical name?
Yeah.
It's just what happened that day.
Just
I've always known that both of us were mistakes. You're always
We
the
have
only one
one
that was
to name
fine.
him.
I think that's the way it was.
Sure,
That middle child.
yeah.
They weren't gonna have that happen.
Grandma, didn't Merv and Gert Christopher lose a baby and they had named him Merle? Merv and Gert Christopher? You know, they had a little baby that died.
Yes, I believe we were such close friends.
And they had named that baby Merle. And he died before Merle was ever born. That's why I wondered if that was that you liked that name.
Boy,
See, Paul, you don't know everything. I don't know how to go behind my screens.
well, am I gonna have to take all that stuff home and put it in the junk?
You just leave it on the table there.
Huh?
Just leave it on the table.
Let somebody else.
Okay, what's your final, have you got any more questions, or is this your final
Yes, is
history
there
lesson?
Grandma, what
anything else you want to
do you
know?
tell this? Do you tell the story about when Bob White came over to fix something in your kitchen? Dad, remember that? Something about what was that? What was that story? Do you remember anything about that?
Oh,
Grandma's laughing.
Grandma knows the story.
She's
Yes,
laughing.
What happened there?
he went home.
Well, first of all, to let everybody know, Bob White is Gretchen's brother.
Brother.
And this is why they were dating. While they were dating.
Yes, they were dating. So he goes home and he says to Gretchen, don't you ever marry that man. They've got pigs in the kitchen. They've got pigs in the house. And they didn't tell that for a while, of course. You know, David had pigs, of course. That was his project in school. And he had pigs up in his bedroom. Up in the,
No, I brought the little ones in the first week.
well, then he had them in the barn and it got cold and this old sow had all her pigs and the thing, what did you have? You had something on electricity to,
Well, I had bulbs, but then they'd get weak, so I put them in the box and put them in front of the register in the kitchen. I had, 5, 6, 7 of them in there at one time.
we did that often. Or we had a cook stove and put the oven down and put the box on there so
Yeah.
it was nice and it'd warm them up, you know.
Yeah. And he was there working on the furnace.
And of course, Bob was kidding. I mean, he knew while the pigs were in there and he'd been there before. He knew about it, but He just went home.
Sorry?
He just went home to make Gretchen a little bit irritated.
To razz her, huh?
Don't you ever marry that man. They have pigs in the house.
Well, what were some of the, do you have any good stories about Ori and Merle? Crazy things they did?
How about the bullet hole in the window?
Yeah, I always wondered what that was.
He's gonna leave.
He's like, tell stories.
We're getting close here.
I stretch.
I tell you,
What happened there?
Well, she didn't know half the things that
Yeah,
were
she
not.
probably didn't know about some of these
All
stories.
this,
The hole in the picture window, the one, the BB hole in the big window by the porch, what happened?
I think you better ask Merle.
They heard it.
Well, he,
We like these.
and Dad tells about when he wasn't supposed to have the gun and he shot himself through the hand and he couldn't tell you or he'd be in trouble. Do you remember
No,
that?
he came home in a hurry when he,
After he shot himself,
Yeah,
but he wasn't supposed to have it or something, was he?
Well, he
'Cause
was
It
a
was a
friend.
friend's, it was a
friend's
friend's
gun.
gun, and I can have one of these, and he was pushing it down and
put his hand over it.
went in the wrong space. I like the one where he's doing the laundry, and his hand got stuck in the wringer.
See, Grandma didn't, he couldn't
still-
tell her all
his
of that, huh?
Fingers, he says, still
Yeah,
don't
it
have
does.
the right circulation.
Because in the winter, it turns white when it's cold.
Well, Ori, didn't he actually chase you with it?
Shoot you.
what, the gun?
Mhm.
We used to sit up on the bridge, and my girlfriend and I'd be playing dolls on the front porch, and he'd get up there and aim at us and shoot us at us.
Grandma, did you know that he was aiming a gun at
Shoot through, shoot a hole in the, she'd never believe it until she saw the BB hole in the bay window.
It's a long ways for a gun to go.
Pump those up.
They could have hurt you.
Hurt me.
Probably why he
It
was,
hurt me a lot,
Like a BB
because he
gun.
wasn't always that far away.
Well, like Lori got hit with Eric's BB gun, she's like, oh, it hurt. But I mean, there was no marks or anything, but one of those.
Grandma,
This was a big, stronger BB
Grandma,
gun.
what was the depression like?
Well, I'll tell you, we didn't suffer in the Depression. We had cattle, we milked cows, and we churned, so we had our butter, we had our milk, we had a chicken house, so we had our chickens, so we had eggs. And I went down to St. Joe and worked a few days a week. Russie had a pretty small salary, but
Where did he work then? Did he work at the elevator, or when did he work at Wedren Silica?
he only worked at Silica a little while after we were married, and then they hired him at the elevator. So,
what year was that? What year did he start working at the elevator, do you think?
you know, well, he was working, I can't tell you just when he went to the elevator.
Were any of his kids born? Can you go by that?
But he wasn't at the pit more than a few months after we were married.
Okay.
So then,
So he was at the elevator when the kids were
Okay, you
born.
married in what year?
27.
27. Merle was born in 28.
so did you use,
June 1st.
did you use your salary for, like to make payments on the farm or something, or?
Yes, that's what those checks were.
Yeah, Grandma, tell us how you ended up buying the farm.
Well, I can't, the checks should tell that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where I put them.
But you bought it from,
Oh, here they are.
like,
And then we decided that we wanted to buy that farm. So
Is this it, Grandma?
Grandma agreed to that, and so we borrowed money of my dad
okay.
and bought it.
For how much
Well,
back then?
there's 1,500.
Yeah, I think it
What are
tells
these?
on this, on this big,
Oh, on this thing in the
yeah,
back.
this.
Here you go.
Okay.
Now, what is this for? For the
Oh,
farm?
on my
birthday. I was 2 years old, Grandma.
6 months, John $2,334.
And that was for,
1,500
At
at the time of
5%
the
interest.
purchase. Oh, yeah, we paid 1,500 and then we borrowed 23.
Yeah, because there was 5% interest. Now, what did that get you? What part of the farm?
Well, it was the house and that timber down there,
See, that's what the.
and a little bit up on the hill.
To cut that down, see.
There was no,
does it have any acreage on there?
that was just that little bitty farmland up on the hill.
Mm-hmm. So when did you acquire, like, across the road?
That included that,
Well, that included that
the
too.
riverland, that river down there, but we didn't think of that.
Well, how about across Wedren Road?
Yeah,
Did that include that too?
but you know, that was worth nothing.
Right.
Money not. See, that's what.
I know one thing, we better save all these. This might be very important someday.
Why?
Well, if you would ever sell it, or either that or tear it up and hope nobody's got any record of it. Our last dinner.
So
How do I get a picture of those?
Do you remember that, Jen? That dinner?
We catered the dinner, the last dinner we had there.
But don't forget Chief Shaban. He's very
Don't forget Reddy.
But he's a lot older than you are.
And nobody have to have
Yes,
to
he
work.
was, he died in 84, 1884.
And how old was he?
But we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't, if he hadn't warned the parents.
True or worth
to get out there.
Even Arts did that.
Now,
Because many of the families that weren't born were killed.
where were your 3 kids
Butchered.
born? Were your 3 kids born at home?
All but David. I did go to hospital for David.
But the first 2 then were born at the house?
And Grandma Stangeland's sister lived in Norway. And her husband never had much work. She was glad to be a midwife and she did that.
So
She
the
took care of
doctor,
me both times.
so you didn't even have a doctor there?
Oh, yes,
Oh, he was there for the birth?
yeah. Dr. Fred came out and did that.
Huh. What room were you in? Were you
Oh.
upstairs?
Sure, in that bedroom
In your bedroom?
downstairs.
Oh, downstairs.
Who else is in here?
Sure. That's where Rory was born.
You were born at home?
Bedroom. But I went to the hospital with David.
Why did you go to the hospital? Just because?
Well, what's her name was gone too then, so old enough so that she didn't go out anymore, so I don't know how I happened to save all those checks.
They're pretty. Merle's got the check. I suppose you gave it to him. I think from the doctor in the hospital when he was born.
The doctor and the midwife.
Doctor and the midwife. Who was she?
Oh, me.
Oh, I can't remember.
What was her name?
Oh, honestly.
But anyway, he's got them, aren't they on a,
He put them on a board.
he put them on a board and then,
So he can save them.
mhm.
So I think it was $50 total.
Was it?
Oh, I don't think so.
I think both of them total.
Well,
Did they?
30-something
forgot.
for the doctor.
He might know. Who might do names here?
Grandma, what are some of your earliest memories of when you were real young?
you know, I often think when the Titanic went down, remember that? That bottle? I remember my dad was I suppose they got to put on a little radio. We had a little, what do you call those little radios? Anyway, I can remember he and I standing outside the corner of the house. And he kept looking and looking and I don't know what, just standing there. he was quite perturbed about it.
Did you understand it?
No, I don't think so. I remember that time.
Yeah.
But I really don't remember a whole lot of things. We had the flu, Myrna and I, when my mother died, and you know, we had registers. See, there was a stove in the living room and a stove in the dining room, and of course a cook stove in the kitchen. So there was a register over each stove, not in the kitchen, but in the living room, and she was in the downstairs bedroom, and we weren't allowed down because she had the flu, and we were sick too. And so I remember us laying on the floor and watching things down through that register.
We used to do that too. And then it was so cold upstairs. And you had these big feather beds, you know, and you just quilts on you and snuggle down in that feather bed. Getting up in the morning was the bad thing.
I can remember sleeping with Grandpa in that front bedroom. And I could never move. You know, because those quilts were so heavy.
I know it.
That you laid like this, you know. You just laid in your back and that was it. Because you couldn't turn over or anything.
Now, when you say front room, which room do you mean?
The downstairs.
Were you ever, now we're talking about Grandpa's house.
Grandpa.
Like Michael's.
Yeah, which
Were
was
you ever in
the
that?
schoolhouse?
No, up at the farm.
Around the
road.
corner and down.
Up the road.
The only one I remember is
The
him being
schoolhouse.
at the schoolhouse.
Okay, well, he lived on the farm about a mile, direction would that be, east of there.
Watching TV and playing and coming back.
And there was, you'd come into the kitchen and you'd go through the dining, or through the sitting room, and then there was his bedroom. And when I stayed with him, that's where he slept. But I can remember, you know, one of the best things I remember about Grace, when I'd stay up there, that's when George was home. And she'd come to the bottom of the stairs. She'd come to the bottom of the stairs. And she'd say, George, George, oh George. You'd hear brrr in George's room. Pretty soon, about 5 minutes later, she'd come back. George, George, oh George.
Yes, I can hear that check too.
And I'll bet you she'd do that 4 or 5 times. Poor old George would roll out of bed. She'd never say get up or anything else. It was always the same, George, George, oh George. You know, George had probably been out the night before, you know. But she'd just keep doing that until he got up.
And just think that old schoolhouse down there. Four generations of us went to school there.
Oh, really?
I've got the picture of Grandma and Grandpa and their teacher in, what was the date? I didn't think about bringing that. Oh, I cherish that picture so much because that was about, well, maybe, I don't say that she was the first teacher, but she boarded it at Grandma's house with Grandpa, with the great grandma. She boarded there, and they went to school together. And then it was her 3 children who went to school there. Orville, Ori, and Lily, and Hazel. And then we went, 6 of us. And then
We all went.
And then you 3 went, and David was in 6th grade when it closed. No,
I went 3 years.
3 years.
And I had my big sister take care of me.
Oh, yes, I remember.
Ori would take, she'd get, there were some big boys in each
I
grade.
remember something
Mean
else
boys,
about
too.
school.
They didn't fool with Ori.
And I was the only girl.
Yeah, she was. They didn't fool with her. But Merle was gone. He wasn't. He was.
He wouldn't have took too good care.
Nah, he loved him. Yeah.
He was embarrassed when she was born.
Four. Okay, he was in 4th grade when she went.
No, it was,
He came home one day and he
he
says,
was embarrassed when you were born.
it's terrible
She
in
wasn't to tell
school.
anybody.
She don't know anything. She don't know anything that's in the books. She's, oh, it's terrible. Oh, he just made such a story. And of course, I got all upset and I went up to the teacher and I said, what's the matter with Ori? What's she doing in school? And nothing. Why? I said, Merle's came home, he says, she just don't know anything. Well, of course, she was in 1st. She was in 1st grade and he was in 4th, and he thought she only knows some of the.
And then when David was born, it was to fight who was gonna be the first to tell when we got to school. And of course, Merle left at 6 o'clock in the morning to go build the fires, and I don't know when he came
Yeah,
along.
but he didn't want you to tell, did he?
Well, he wanted
was
to do it.
embarrassed. Oh,
He
was
wanted
that
to do
it?
it.
Oh, I
That's what
thought
I
you didn't want
remember.
anybody to know.
Oh, that was funny.
You know, all those old clothes we used to dress up in, those
Oh,
little girls,
my.
were they yours when you were young, or?
If I should show you some of the pictures of Grandma and her friends, when they got together for an afternoon, they went and put on funny old hats, and Grandma had all these old clothes. And they'd go out in the yard and dress up, but had all these old clothes on.
And you had some of them,
Sure.
and is that
You
the
know-
same clothes then?
You know what happened to them? They were put in the, Grandma had trunks, and so Merle had, Lauren had the trunks. Lauren had the trunks in the old schoolhouse up there. All these clothes in them. And you know how the lock would come down on the old trunk? Well, there was a little hole there and he didn't close that, and the mice got in and ate them up. I was so sick. The only thing that I saved out of that trunk was it's a dress I've got in my closet that Grandma wore when she was a little girl, a baby. Just think how old it is.
Was that the one Megan had her picture taken in?
1856, she was born, and she wore it when she was about 3 or 4 years old.
Okay, and there's a picture of her, a big picture too that goes with it?
One of you got the, one of your kids dressed in it.
Yeah, one of mine did. Is that who that belonged to then?
We're gonna try to get
Is there anything in there you like?
So it's still hanging there. It really should be in an
There's carrots, you like carrots?
antique shop. Unless some of you want it.
Well, not,
They're
for
big.
sale? You mean for sale, or you mean like a museum?
No, to keep,
Yeah.
because it's an antique.
Well, Grandma, what happened to your, Grandma, what happened to your dress? I wore your, wasn't that your wedding dress that I wore? Oh, you've got that?
She don't remember that. I'm sure.
She doesn't know that you've got it.
It wasn't a wedding,
Oh.
that we think of as a wedding.
No, but it was
What she wore?
It's kinda
Oh, I didn't know that. I haven't seen that.
And I've got,
She wore, Patty was in a play and wore your wedding dress.
For their
Well, I wore it for their
Kinda
anniversary
come
play,
Oh,
remember?
is that what it was?
Yeah.
For both.
Yeah.
But did we have films of that? Remember, Grandma, when all the grandkids, when we did that play at your anniversary party?
yes, I sure
And I
do.
got to be Grandma.
And
And Kyle, wasn't Kyle
And Paul.
Lussie?
Paul was the preacher.
I don't remember, I suppose.
I just found it the other day. Merle wrote it, didn't he?
I'm sure.
Uh-huh, yeah.
I found that the
music
other
at
day
Mom's
and I
though.
went,
The music we sang.
I still can play it.
I want you to. I think that was neat.
That was neat.
Did you have a honeymoon? Did you and Grandpa have a honeymoon?
and the
Oh, she just
old
said she went to Niagara Falls.
car
for her honeymoon.
wasn't working too good. And we stopped in Lorraine, Ohio. That was my cousin's. Well, I guess her name goes from me now. Anyway, I was out there and stayed with her for other times when I was teaching. And we stopped there and stayed a few days. And
Make a circle and then pinch them together. Just pinch them
and
together.
then
Lovers now.
he worked on the car and worked on it, and we went on to Niagara Falls, and then we stopped there as we came back.
I just make the circle.
Gladys Slater was her name.
Now, where was your wedding at?
At the parsonage.
Flower service.
We just went to the parsonage and
In
were
Ottawa?
married.
Now, how thick
In
do you
Ottawa?
make yours? I am terrible.
Trinity Parsonage.
Did you have guests or?
Yeah.
See, that's.
Yeah, Lauren and
I never watched.
and Verna.
Were,
That's Russ's sister and my brother went with us.
Yeah.
And Grace had a nice dinner for us when we got home. And then we had our suitcases all packed and ready, and we knew that there'd be trouble. So we went up and hid them up in a ditch up on the road.
Oh, no.
Well,
She's told me a pencil.
somebody suspicioned that I suppose it was Lauren.
That's what I,
Anyway, they went and got the suitcases and took them over to Grandma's. Well, then we couldn't find them.
then I see.
Oh. So somebody hinted that Grandma might know. So we stopped at Grandma's
So I know
and
how long.
did we have a time then to get them out because Lauren was there.
Board is 12 inches.
We had an awful time to get them in the car.
No.
But then we finally got going. Went to
How
Niagara
many do you make
Falls.
out of one of your bags?
was it nice
Do you
weather?
have any idea?
Yes, first day of June.
Did you have a shivaree when you got back? Did they have a shivaree or did they do that?
Oh, I can't remember a shivaree.
Did you start out with a house full of furniture or?
My dad used to say there wasn't anything good about my teaching except all I did was spend the money fast. So I didn't have much when I got through teaching.
Was that the sewing machine you always had?
Yeah.
The treadle? Was that the treadle machine? So then what'd you do? Just add slowly?
That was the only thing, and then, well, we bought just as we had money to buy. We'd buy, first thing was a kitchen table, and that's where we ate.
Boy, that would be a big house.
I had a shower,
Oh,
and so I had some cooking utensils. And Grandma gave me things.
who had the shower?
Boy, I can't remember that. Grandma, I suppose.
What can you tell us about your floods? The floods. When the river would flood in the spring? Are there any interesting stories about that?
Oh, me.
I remember that a couple times. When the Newark Fire Department had to come and
Oh, really?
do some, oh yes, gosh, we got the whole,
Clean out the well.
yep. Well, that, and I remember sandbagging, Kyle, Dad and I, and Dave Berge went and, I think Merle was in it.
I never
we filled sandbags to get ready for it, and I don't think that even did the trick.
Around the house.
Yep.
Around the windows.
Yep.
Did it always flood from the beginning?
No, that was the only time. Grandpa Thompson had marked on a tree where the water had been before, and it never had been up that high. But there was a cloudburst at Aurora, and it just came right down that river in a hurry. And I remember that I heard something, and I got up and looked out the window, and I could see that water coming, and boy, did we get dressed. And David had pigs in the barn. Oh, we went in and woke him and told him he had to get those pigs out, and he took them up on the hill.
Now, that was that 54? That's the worst flood you ever had, was 54,
yes.
the year that I got married.
And we had a boat. We had a boat that was in the garage out there, not the garage, but the shed.
Yep.
And that thing came floating out. And we grabbed it, or he waded out and grabbed it and tied it up. And boy, we went out in that boat.
It was an old flat bottom boat, wasn't it? An old wooden flat bottom boat. Remember
Well, we
that?
had a chance though. We put all the furniture up on stakes and carried all my wedding presents
And you know,
upstairs.
she was gonna be married, and she had had a shower, and she had those gifts were just great. So what did she do? But she just, she bundled all those that up. She was working in Ottawa as a nurse, and so she got everything in her car, and away she went.
We carried a lot of them upstairs.
Before it got
We carried a lot of them upstairs.
Before it got too bad. She took off, so she didn't have to go out in the boat.
It never came up above the rafters in the basement though. did it?
No, oh,
But it came close. I mean,
it sure did. Oh, it just came in there, and we took everything upstairs, the furniture. But I believe we rolled up the rug and took it upstairs. Anyway, we were ready for this.
Jeffrey.
Coming in the house, and I believe it was 4 inches, and we had just laid hardwood floors down upstairs in the living room and the dining room, and if it had come in up there, but it just, I think it was about 4 or 5 inches coming up.
I remember the year where we were.
Yeah, what year would that have been?
We were
Came
boating
down
around the
sandbar.
yard in the flat bottom boat.
I remember.
Yep, and that was the year we tried to.
Well, how old would
we
you have been then? What year would that have been?
Gosh, it got me. I don't know if I would have been in 5 or 6 years old. But I remember.
65, 66.
That was.
No, it would have been more like 71, 72.
I remember it. I don't
Now,
know.
You'd be in high school.
Now, Wedren was pretty flooded too, but it didn't come up to your folks, I don't think.
We had
They lived up on the hill.
Indian Creek and that was flooded.
They didn't live down, they lived down in where they did, no, they didn't live up on the hill.
Oh, no, they lived down below. Well, did they get in on that, Patrick? Oh, and I was gonna tell you, when we talked about the Depression, we belonged to Trinity, and we knew the Grugies. You remember? Remember the Grugies?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
We became very good friends later, but we knew them real well. And one time I said in the summertime, come out and have dinner with us. So I had chicken, and I had, remember that tree right out by the east of the house? We had a table out there, and I served them chicken, and I don't know what else. Oh, how they ate. And afterwards, she said, "Do you know that we hadn't had a meal all that depression time until we were out there and had that chicken. I never tasted chicken so good in my life," she says. And you know, I didn't realize he was out of work. He'd walk up and all around trying to find work. And if he got home with a loaf of bread, they were
Thrilled.
they thought it was great if he had a loaf of bread. And then to come out and have, well, as I told you, we had chickens, we had eggs, we had butter.
Pretty well insulated from the depression.
Yeah.
Now, were you able to sell that
And
too
never-
then? You sold some of it too?
And we bottled milk
Cash? Yeah.
and sold it.
Well, I imagine you just traded a lot too, for what you needed.
So I tell you, we didn't realize that there was we knew there was a depression, but I mean, we didn't get hurt in any way.
Right.
Oh, and there were some families up on the hill. And you know that woman that lived up there on that hill is in the nursing home in Marseilles. I've been to see her quite a few times.
See, I don't know how far they mined that back.
Boy, her husband did very well after they left there, or her son. And they had a home over on Route 6. But I haven't seen where she died, but she was bad when I got.
Well, how did the war in like 41, how did that change things? Did you follow that much, or?
No, I can't remember that it affected us in any way. It seemed like Russie had to sign up some way, but he never was called. So I never had anyone in the wars. No, sir.
Yeah, because that was such a big impact, but you never know. I mean, everybody.
She
Funded film there.
Aunt It Debo. And I took Grandma. Sometimes I drove her up when I had a car, and to see Aunt It. And we came up. She was a big woman, big fat woman, and she'd laugh. She'd go this way when she'd laugh. And she was laughing and laughing and laughing that day. And we said, what's so funny? And you know how they had cook stoves? And then they'd have a pan on the back of it, and all the junk went in there, the potato peelings and the leftovers and spoiled food or anything went into that pan. And then it got warm, and they gave it to the chickens. So her husband was a drinker, always drank. She never had any money or anything. And so she said, he came home drunk one night, and he came up to bed, and she says, well, did you have anything to eat? Yes, I did. I just had a dish of that good stuff on the back of the stove. And it was laughing. And you know that story, I told that just a few weeks ago to somebody, and Arlene Bastion was there, and she says, yes, I remember that story. Oh, how I had that laugh that time. Yeah. He'd had a dish of that stuff on the back of the stove. Oh.
Grandma. Parties like we do now, with a lot of relatives, or
Well, I can just remember one time, well, several times, waking up in the middle of the night, and I'd sneak down and look and see on the Christmas tree what was there for, because it was probably one thing. And one Christmas, I got a doll with a tin head. Oh, she was a pretty one. But it's, you know, the body, of course, was stuffed. But she had a tin head. And oh, I thought so much of her. And one time my brother rolled it down the stairs. And it put a dent in her head. Oh, I remember how I went after Lauren. So she died with a dent in her head.
Did she have a name?
I think her name was May.
Well, did you have big, a lot of company in and Christmas tree in the house and all
Grandma
that?
always had us over for
Did she?
Christmas.
You stayed there and
Grandma always had us for Christmas. But it was one gift, of course. And
from, like, would your grandma have given everyone gifts? Or,
yeah. Oh, Grandma did a lot. Grandma had money. Grandpa was, you see, Grandpa was given that farm, the farm, when he married her. That great-grandma, their picture, she had money. She was what we thought was, or what we would call a rich woman then. I don't suppose it amounted to much today, but anyway, she told him if he would marry her, she would give him that farm. And of course, he was one of those 11 I told you that was born in that little cabin. They had nothing. But he was a worker, and he had that farm, and he bought two more farms in the years. So they had all that whole, they had many acres.
and it didn't matter to him?
Of course, it wouldn't be many today, but it was then.
It didn't matter to him what had happened before?
Well, yes, it did, I think, when I look back on it.
Yeah.
He never was quite, well, I look at the pictures and I think that he never was quite, but he was good to her, and she was good to him. I mean,
See, maybe they just weren't in love?
it was never a love affair, that was for sure. But she honored him, and he was a hard worker, and he had a shop out there that he ground feed for all the neighbors, for chickens and things. And oh, he did work out in that shop day after day and repaired things for neighbors. And oh, I remember my dad would take things over there to have it repaired. And so he was a good worker. Built a big barn. And
Do you think she was in love before they got married with someone else?
I don't know. Grandma was a very pretty woman. Her father was raised horses and took them out, race horses.
Oh, really?
He had a, what do you call it?
Racetrack?
Yeah, out east of the house. And then he'd go out with his horses and to race. That was her first husband, or her husband. He died young. He died before Grandma was married. And one time he brought a pony home, a really nice little pony. And he told him, "I'm taking it home to the prettiest little girl that was ever born." And that was my grandmother. And you see, she was a nice looking woman in that book. And she was, lively little, a lively little woman. So I take it that she had many beaux, as we call them, and I suppose there was, well, I think there's goings on today too, only that there's a lot of preparation to prepare for things that are like that.
Well, I'm human.
So, when you hear and see all the sex that's going on, you just wonder how our poor young kids are gonna live through it.
Are you teller now?
I just,
But they treated each other,
and what they're going through in school. They don't have sex, the boys ignore them, and the girls laugh at them. So, you know, it's bad, just as bad as it can be.
but once they got married, then they had like a happy marriage.
Yes.
Together, I mean,
I was very, very close to Grandma. There never was a day that I didn't either go up there or talk to her on the phone.
would that be after you lost your mom or even before that?
Yeah, after I was married. And I was very close to Grandma in all my years. And I never heard a cross word from her, ever. Nor I never heard him say a cross word to her, ever. So it was...
But yet you never knew the real story then until much later.
Not till just before I was married. Because I just Nettie knew that I wondered, well, second, third cousins, it isn't that close, but for children. But Nettie knew that, and so she told me in secret. Otherwise, I would never have known it. And there were very few people that did know it. Only those that lived right close there.
So there's probably nobody left that knows the real story either then, huh?
No. Well, you know, I've got something for the kids downstairs.
Are there kids here?
Too good.
There's one or
As we
two.
say that, someone screams.
Better get it delivered. It's all about the mansion here. Grandma covered out of the paper at that time.
The Scott asked her,
And I
got the river. She said, "Oh, that was in the
You're welcome.
back there."
You're welcome. You just have your box. Show them to Mom.
This is how he paid it off.
Show your box to her.
He ended up paying it.
Yeah. Oh, say, I had one for Melanie.
Okay.
I suppose they've done it upstairs
So
now.
it's when he paid.
Oh, here, let me have that picture.
And it is true.
I want to tell them a story about that. No, this mansion. The
Yeah,
mansion.
it's on tape.
Here, you know, one time, there was open house at the mansion a few years ago. Oh, it's been several years now.
But she don't know who.
And she took us all through it, and she pointed out the bedroom.
So see if,
Now this,
Yeah, I'm very suspicious. I
this
think
is where Reddy died,
gotta prove this somehow.
is in this room. And she went all through it and everything, all about him. So when it was all over, and the guests had gone, I went to her privately.
You wanna work in
And I said, no, that's not the room he died in. I I said, if you go downstairs,
I probably would.
I had Tom say,
Oh, I bet, yeah, he.
and I gave Reddicks one, be part of it, and
Not really, she just said that you'd
I
probably.
gave one to the museum. And so I said, it describes his
Well,
death,
Margaret's the one that told us.
and it says he was sick. And he came up and sat in his room, and it showed,
No, I didn't know anything
it
about
told
it.
the cherry set in and the color of it. And it said the sun shone through, and it told the color of the drapes, and it shone right on him. I said, the sun don't come up in the west room. It comes up in the east, and that's the room he died in. I was nice with her, but I said, if you go downstairs, you'll find
Last
that.
time he did.
My grandmother cut that out. Was she horrid?
She had that speech all learned already.
She thought the old woman didn't know what she was talking about. But the Reddicks is,
Well, would have the University of Illinois or the appellate court, because that's not the appellate court.
no, no, this is both ready. But isn't there anything in here on the, I got a picture of the court somewhere.
I didn't see it in there.
Did you have this out?
If that had been on the other side, that's like it never been sold.